Logan Yonavjak has been profiling what it is that makes people successful and why others fail in multiple business arrangements. She kicks off with some really hard-hitting statistics.
There's some pretty extreme stats that I've heard out there. Anywhere from 40 to 50% of promotional hires don't work out within the first 18 months. 70% of M&A deals don't work out because of culture, some sort of team-related issue. 65% of companies don't work out or fail because of some people-related issue, and that's a Harvard Business Review statistic.
Resilience or grit is quoted often as one of the most important things around individual success in business. Logan shed some new light on this subject for me.
Well, I think there's this misconception about the concept of grit, and I think that gets overlaid with working hard, and working hard is really important, but grit is more, I think a lot of founders think that investors and stakeholders want to see them grind, and almost to the point of burnout. It's like a badge of honor.
#startup life is hard and can be brutal. Why do we lack the support structures that other high-performance roles demand?
If you're going to be an astronaut, or you're going to be a professional athlete, or something that's really demanding, usually there's a lot more support around those roles.
Understanding peak performance and the signs and indicators of this is really what Logan is all about.
And so sometimes you can sense a lot from a person from what they
Logan Yonavjak, welcome to the show.
It's so great to be here, Josh. Thank you for having me.
I really appreciate you dialing in all the way in from New York, especially as it's late in the evening there. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation for a number of different reasons. You had a business which you've just recently gone through a name change. You were the founder, Readiness Institute, and you're now the Readiness Engine. And so let's circle around that. Readiness means to me that you've kind of, gotten ducks in a row, you've got planning, you've got resources, all that sort of stuff. But I know that that's only part of the story. So tell us about the Readiness Engine.
Well, just the concept of readiness is what we're promoting in our tools, and how we think about leadership is the concept of being ready to lead at the next level. So really liked maintaining the name readiness in some capacity, but people were getting confused with the concept of founder and it being limited to startup founders. And so we just decided to make it easier on everyone and to change our name to Readiness Engine. And so that was the impetus for the change. We did bring on a founding advisor from Stanford University who's also capitalizing the business. And so that was also a big change. And he wanted to also change the name. So,
Yeah, great. We'll come back and talk about that quite a lot more, but I'd like to just go back a step and pick up on the L word, the leadership word that you've mentioned there. Leadership is such an interesting concept, especially in the world in which we play today. So how does leadership factor into what you are up to as a business?
well, I think for the first time that I'm aware of, what we're doing is being able to assess leadership patterns at scale and at a lower cost and at a higher volume of data than ever before because of AI capabilities, and being able to digest so many more research reports and information from all over the world that's being amassed about leadership, and integrating that into the platform we've built. So I think we're just at a really interesting inflection point in talking about leadership in terms of measuring it and quasi quantifying. I like to say quasi because it's never going to be, fully precise like certain types of mathematics, because people are so dynamic and ever changing.
Yeah, yeah. And you talked about AI there, and that's a point in time in terms of an evolution of the tool set, but we are still distinctly human. So in the time that you have been engaged in this space and doing this work, what have you noted about the change in the demands upon us as leaders, given the incredibly dynamic world that we live in today?
So I think that in many ways, the tools we're developing are meeting the needs of the time in a really interesting way, because we're actually positioning ourselves as a group that can help evaluate which leaders are really ready to manage AI effectively. Because what we really are seeing is increased complexity demands on cognitive and emotional functioning as a result of increased AI tools. So I'm seeing it in my own work where, more tools come up. It feels like every day people are just word of mouth telling me to try X, Y, and Z, and it's very overwhelming. Not to mention the output of AI, if you don't necessarily know what questions or how to program it or how to program skills or memory, for instance, you might just get a deluge of information. And I actually had this happen the other day. Uh, I was asking it some marketing advice, and I had to close my computer and walk away because it was just spitting out just volumes of information. And so, yeah, I think we're basically at an ever increasing complexity inflection point. I think we're really situated in most jobs that are dealing with AI. Are I don't know that everyone is prepared for that level of complexity.
Yeah, yeah, I get it, and I agree. I'll contextualize. Couple of weeks ago, we were due to be in Egypt, traveling through there via the Middle East. We cancelled the trip because I had a personal injury, and then also it was a bit dangerous in the regions we were traveling through, Saudi and Oman, and so insurance demanded that it was the best thing for us to do. We decided, my wife Tina and I, to take a week to do what we called Build Week and Code Camp. And so I'd circled around a couple of use cases for the prior 6 to 8 weeks or so, built a playbook on how to engage with these tools because what I'd leaned into and realized myself is that in the prior few weeks, about 4 to 6 weeks or so, there'd been some releases of some new tools, Claude Cowork specifically. Then Perplexity Computer came out, and I looked into them and I realized that I was using things based upon having a smart colleague in the room. So having a conversation, a relationship with a chatbot, and I considered myself to be an advanced user. And so very much in that Dunning-Kruger effect kind of space, I was nowhere near as good as I thought that I was. So what do you think for the leader in this world? What are you seeing that leaders that are embracing and doing, things super well in the world of AI, what are they doing that others are perhaps missing?
Well, I think to some degree it has to do with what sorts of capacities, we measure a variety of different, we call them constructs, and so I'll speak to a few of those because I think they're very related to the question you asked me, which is I think things like coachability and identity flexibility. So the ability to flex your sense of self and the role that you're playing in any given context with a lot of grace and openness and objectivity is going to serve really well in these instances because in a lot of cases AI is able to do a lot more computational work or often creative work that humans were doing before and may be doing a better job of that. And so if your identity is connected to your ability to be an amazing marketer and come up with good hooks or different strategies, and you're seeing the AI can do it better than you, that could kind of for the a person who has kind of a lower level of coachability or identity flexibility, that could be really threatening to one's ego. um, there's also the ability to pivot quickly. So, how do you pivot quickly while maintaining your mission in mind? Like, how do you hold the vision of what you're trying to accomplish, but also know that you have to pivot with the new information coming in, and the information coming in is happening kind of ever more rapidly. And so these are all um, capacities within people that are, if you have a higher level of them, you're more likely to be able to adapt to AI interfaces or AI relationships.
Mm. Yeah, we talked historically about the importance of IQ, intellectual quotient, and then Daniel Goleman, it was 25 years ago, he brought us EQ, which is your emotional quotient. It's your ability to have a self-awareness and awareness of the impact that you have upon others. A few years ago, it's not mine, but I borrowed it from someone else, can't recall who. We started talking about AQ, which is adaptability quotient. And so
I
what I'm
love
hearing you
that.
say, yeah, you're welcome to use it, it's not mine. So what I'm hearing you say is that being able to assess, measure, and understand that is critical for people's ability to both hire leaders and help them succeed inside their business, but also as an individual leader themselves, being able to get across that. The other thing that you mentioned there was someone once described it as your identity surface area, which is a really
Mm.
interesting concept. So the notion being that how do you take someone down if that's what you want to do, upset someone, get them to go into a bit of a reset or a tailspin kind of mode. You attack their identity surface area. And how do you
Hmm.
understand what their identity surface area is? You look at the things that they talk about in public. So for me, I talk about growth. I talk about wealth. I talk about exits and building businesses as well. If someone desired to do that, then those would be the things that they would go after. And what you talked about there is flexibility of your identity as well. Uh, you may not have an answer for this, but I'm going to ask nonetheless. It's hard for us to flex on our identity. So if someone's just hearing this for the first time, I expect they'll go, okay, so I understand now what that means. So how would someone who firstly understand what it is that they are projecting to the world, what their identity stands for? Because I think a lot of people don't know that. And then how could they go about having an openness around their identity and adaptability of it?
I think that's a great question. I mean, this is a lot of what we coach around, or, the purpose of setting a developmental baseline that you can then develop markers for progress around. What I like about what we've built is it's got a roadmap associated with it. And so, with just to step back a little bit, the idea of coachability and identity flexibility is if you are, so we rate people along a scale of 0 to 6. And so, if you're at a lower level of coachability, you are likely going to have an individual perspective on problems or the system. And so when critique might come in, or outside, what might consider criticism, you as an individual consider that a threat to your identity because
Hey, it's Josh. Thanks for being part of the show. Most founders don't just build one thing, they build many: the company, the team, and hopefully the legacy. JB Ware in New Zealand understands that your exit isn't an ending, it's the bridge to what you build next. Whether that's backing the next generation, funding what matters, or creating impact that compounds across decades. The best exits aren't measured in commas alone, they're measured in what those commas enable. Two Commas is proudly partnered with JB Ware, building wealth that works as hard as you do.
you see yourself as kind of the only node in the system. And as you evolve your ability to see more complexity, and as your identity becomes more flexible, you see, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 orders of perspective at once. And you're able to hold those perspectives more objectively. So when someone gives potential feedback on maybe a project, or even on how you delivered a presentation, your response is to take that as part of the system, not as a direct threat to your own personal identity. So that's how it works in terms of
Mm.
what we're evaluating when someone speaks in either through our assessment, or we're evaluating through transcript data. What we're doing is evaluating how many perspectives they're speaking to and drawing from in the stories they tell or examples they give. What happens is some people become very defensive about their individual posture, and they just tend to then repeat similar patterns over and over, and they're not progressing out of that, and that really hampers their professional abilities. And really, what we're talking about is in work context, the ability to innovate and see more innovative outcomes, and be in the right role to take something to the next level, and whether you are ready to take something to the next level alongside whatever you're carrying. So that's really the what got me excited about was, let's if we could put individuals who are at a higher level of development in the right roles, maybe we'll see better innovation outcomes in society.
Right. Yeah, got it. So you've been you're a founder. You've assisted founders raise money. We'll talk about the type of investing that you've been responsible for doing in the past, conscious investing, I think it is. I've probably got that impact investing. I've got that wrong. We'll come back to that in a second, but I'll ask you a very investor-oriented question, and you may have mentioned part of it just then. But within your role inside your business, the Readiness Engine, what problem are you actually solving for inside organizations?
So we are, I'd like to say at a broad level, promotion and hiring risk. We're reducing that. There's some pretty extreme stats that I've heard out there. Anywhere from 40 to 50% of promotional hires don't work out within the first 18 months. Um, 70% of M&A deals don't work out because of culture, some sort of team-related issue. 65% of companies don't work out because or fail because of some people-related issue, and that's a Harvard Business Review's statistic. So, again, you have to dig into the numbers and the way that these numbers are calculated, but I think it does point to a a pretty big problem around just leadership and team development, et cetera, team dynamics. And so what we're solving for at a high level is promotion and hiring risk, but things like execution risk. So is a person able to execute on the tasks before them? If they're handed more things, are they able to juggle them? And there's some pretty practical dimensions to just meeting your next quarterly targets and executing on your job. Um, and things like succession planning, like is the person that's going to take over going to last more than 18 months? And so those are some of the um, dimensions that we at a high level are solving for. And then I think we're also looking at, if a manager is more effective in their role, if they really do have that capacity to lead, you're going to see less turnover. You're going to see higher rates of engagement. There's going to be these byproducts, also spillover effects with the team that those individuals are working with.
Yeah, I get it. So, in essence, you're helping companies solve the problem of growth and hiring and making sure they're getting the right people in the right seat at the right time. Is that
Yeah.
correct? Yeah. Okay. Cool. Love it. Love it. Such a big problem. After I'd exited one of my ventures, I spent some time thinking about what the next one was, and I continued to circle around these two problems. And this is an adjacent one to what we're talking about here. One was disruption of the real estate sector. So I don't particularly like real estate agents. I don't like the process of buying and selling a property, but it was a very
I would
difficult
have to
problem to
agree
solve.
with you.
Right, right. It's not pleasant, right? Ultimately, where I landed is that as a group, they tend to be very self-serving. They're not serving of either of their other stakeholders. They're driving their own need for an outcome, which is to do a deal and get a property sold and then get the commission, right? But the reason that I was unable to find a solution to it, to disrupt the space, which was the intention, is that the decision point sits with the vendor, the owner of the home, and a lot of their decision is based around fear and greed. Best price, worst price. So pursuit of best price, avoidance of worst price kind of thing. And so that is two incredibly powerful and very difficult decision influences for people to make. And I couldn't resolve either of those things effectively. So I wandered away from that. The other one, which is more relevant to this conversation, is the notion of a effective values test. And so I'd like you to think about the importance of values next to the leadership competency, et cetera, that we've just talked about there. But if I think about alignment with an organization, what we're really talking about is people join our culture. We talk about culture, but culture is behavior, and behavior is manifested through, culture is the manifestation of culture is our behavior, but that is driven by our values and our beliefs. And the values sit at the very bottom. So if we can understand really cleanly and truly what someone's values are, both
Mhm.
their toward their stated and their away from values, and we know what ours are as a group, not the ones that we put on the wall, integrity, trust, and honesty. I think we're Enrons, for example, none of them were true. Then we can kind of make sure that those two things line up. Um, to what extent do you consider the values piece as a part of what you're doing as well, or is it a different problem to solve?
Well, I think that's a really great question. I would say that we're not necessarily targeting someone's values. We're looking at their capacity in these different constructs I mentioned, but I think that people with higher levels of development often consider um, values in a more I don't want to call it a serious way, but maybe a more um, sophisticated way. I would say, I think someone at a lower level development can still assign values that they're following, but they might see it as more black and white or more or less complex in their articulation. So you might have someone who's very um, driven to be in integrity, but their concept of what that is less complex than other someone else's who's got a higher level of development. And then you see people at higher levels of development tend to question things more, tend to question things like, you know, um, religious tenets or things that maybe are just handed to them without a lot of reflection. So I think people at higher levels of development tend to consider more um, pieces of the puzzle. And so maybe the values that were given to them at church when they were growing up become part of a larger constellation of perspectives from different religions, for instance. So someone at a lower level of development might just accept the 10 commandments, and then someone at a higher level of development might take a class on the history of religion and decide, you know what, there's like 50 different perspectives and gray zones on this particular concept, so I'm going
Yeah.
to consider all of them. And so I think it's just how I think someone can have a great moral compass, but it's how many perspectives they're bringing in and considering in their decision making.
Yeah, yeah, great. Ecumenical is the word for that, by the way. I don't know how I know that word, but it's the openness
I
of
love
other
when
kind of
these words just come
religious.
in, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. It just popped into my head again. So it's the consideration of all different religious tenets and being able to factor those into your way of life and thinking in the moment. So acknowledging that your business has moved away from just serving founders, but a lot of this show is geared towards founders and owners of companies. I'm curious, uh, what's the most common, like, invisible flaw that you see in founders that is presents most risk for the company? The thing that probably wouldn't show up at a pitch deck or in a due diligence kind of checklist.
Well, I think there's this misconception about the concept of grit. And I think that gets overlaid with working hard. And working hard is really important, but grit is more, I think a lot of founders think that investors and stakeholders want to see them grind. And almost to the point of burnout, it's like a badge of honor. It's considered sort of a cultural um, accolade if you're just working all the time and you don't sleep, you don't see your family. It's just this interesting um phenomenon almost that's emerged. And I think that what we see is people with that can certainly work for a time, and I'm not saying that you don't have to work long hours as a founder or founding team. But I think that what we're advocating for and what we see as more effective in terms of a sustainable process is actually creating systems around yourself to be able to hold the complexity you're building. So whether it's a group of people that you call on when you really an advisory team that you call on when you really are stressing about a big decision, or whether it's learning a bunch of frameworks of how to think about self-care that you draw from when needed. So if you're really feeling stressed, you either do breathing exercises, you go for a walk, you call a friend, you just have these systems in place that when you get to a point of feeling like you're tipping, you have enough of the resilience built in so you're not going to collapse in on yourself. And so knowing yourself well enough kind of before you hit those moments of great fatigue, that's what I think is not advocated for enough. And I'm surprised, all this money is given to startup teams without a lot of support or follow-up coaching for them to better understand um, themselves as individuals or how to build those resilient systems. And I've used this multiple times before, but if you're going to be an astronaut or you're going to be a professional athlete or something that's really demanding, usually there's a lot more support around those roles. And it seems to me that we're asking people to do a very intense thing, which is birthing a new company and going from 0 to 1 or just continuing to do high growth. And why aren't we giving them more support? Like, it just seems like a strange, shadow risk that we're not considering in really considering beyond just lip service.
Yeah, I love the athletes comparison. I use it in a different context, which is that vision, for example. Sitting with, when you set a goal, sitting with the notion of seeing yourself having achieved that goal and considering what your life might be like, how you might feel, who might be around you, the things that you might do as a consequence of achieving that goal. And athletes are incredibly good at that. You hear of any athlete that, especially individual pursuit sports, 100-meter runners, they've seen themselves go through the tape first, hundreds, thousands, millions of times, right? Because that's the way that their brain is wired. And they've got coaches, psychology people, support people, masseuses, all these sort of folk that will help them along. And you're right. Often it's that lone founder kind of thing that we expect these people to be superhumans and have all the tools and all the awareness and the ability to kind of, generate these incredible outcomes without necessarily giving them the support. Folk that I've had on the show that have been through the build exit thing, nearly most of them will acknowledge that the ones that have been particularly successful will say that they have had a team or they've had people that have been around them to help them succeed at different phases. There was always someone that I could call for an answer, depending on where we're at, would determine who we would call and the stage as well. Picking up on a point that you made earlier, Logan, you mentioned that 67%, I think the number was, of founding teams fail because of relationship problems. Have I got that stat correct?
2/3, so,
Two-thirds. Yeah, good.
2/3 fail because of some sort of internal dynamic.
Got it. Perfect. That would echo what I've observed in the world. I've often said to founders, if there's a co-founding team, one of the very first things that I do is say, "How is your relationship with your co-founder?" And then say, "How do you?" And then they give me an answer, and I say, "Okay, how do you know?" And what would they say? Because I want to
Uh,
assess the health of that relationship. And so, if you've got a significant other at home, like a spouse, for example, those are the two key relationships in your life. If they're both going great, happy days. If one of them is not going well, not so good. If both of them are going bad, and I've seen this on more than one occasion, life sucks, right? Those are the two literally most important relationships that you can have in the world. And if they're not working, that's a horrible, horrible place to be. But what are some of the early warning signs that a founding team is in trouble before it becomes obvious?
Yeah, and there's a lot you can pick up on in conversation, I think, that's one of the things we do is we can evaluate team dynamics and pick up risk flags early on, and so, yeah, I think it's a great question. I think a lot of times it's how people are talking to each other in a conversation. So it's good to observe, if you're going to make an investment in a team, it's good to observe the founders speaking to each other and, things like talking over each other. I often this is body language related, but how much is the other person paying attention when the other one talks? Are they letting them talk? Like, I think there's some basic just communication styles. I think like any relationship, having a shared history and respect for one another and differences and asking questions about, you know, um, clarifying questions before kind of jumping into a response. I think these are all um, I mean, they're good things to practice anyway, but I think if a team is starting to break down, those things get shortcutted and there's a level of disrespect that starts to emerge in tone and body language and just kind of impatience with one another or hearing how they, refer to one another. Usually there needs to be obviously a respectful tone. So I think there's just a lot of sometimes the little things can add up. Obviously, there's big red flags if somebody is talking badly about their co-founder out of the gate. You want to flag that. But yeah, I think that sometimes investors get excited about the product and they don't dig into the relationship and the risks in the
Mm.
relationship, um, as much as they should. So I think it's a little bit about spending time with both of those individuals and seeing how they interact. You
Yeah.
can't pick up
Yeah.
everything, but you can pick up a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I think that's right.
A lot of people ask me, like, why do we need another assessment capability? Like, aren't there a million um, uh, personality tests and skills based tests out there? And so, to that, I would say um, three things. One is most of these tools are measuring static personality traits or skills or behaviors. And not that that's a bad thing, but they don't take into account this, what we called vertical dimensionality, which is this capacity factor of the development of a person over time. And so what you're receiving in your Myers-Briggs readout or your Enneagram is really like, okay, here's your preferences in a report. And then it doesn't really talk about growth areas. Um, it can talk a little bit about how you might evolve or devolve, but there's not like this roadmap for how to actually get to a higher level of complexity. And a lot of them are self-reported. So you're just answering forced choice or multiple choice questions, and that's a lot easier to game these days. And so what we're doing is actually interviewing people in an open-ended scenario-based question way, or taking their transcript data from things they've said and digesting that. So that's sort of some of the ways that I see us being different. Plus, we have this component of evaluating all these research studies around founders, and nobody's really looked at how founders um, need to lead and what the best characteristics are there. And so, yeah, I like to, and plus the AI piece, of course. Like we're in this era now where we can do things at higher volume with more speed and accuracy and cheaper. So,
Yeah. It's interesting you bring up Myers-Briggs, and then there's a myriad of other tests that have these. Dove is one, DISC is another, and I've come across and probably experienced about a dozen of also of these tests. My
same.
understanding is that, yeah, cool. My understanding is that they're all based upon Jung's work from the early 1900s. Which is, I mean, Jung was an incredibly bright, inspired individual who did amazing things for not just psychotherapy, but understanding of psychology and the human mind and how we operate and work. But I think in this day and age, there's probably some evolution that we can have of these things, and how we work, and the way that we engage with work is so different than it was 100 years ago. And Myers Briggs, I think, has been around since the 1970s. No doubt they've evolved
Uh
the
huh.
test to a certain extent, but the last time I did one of these things was a few years ago, admittedly. But I'm like, this just reeks of the things that I was doing back in the early 90s when I was entering the workforce, and it hadn't seemed to have changed so much since then. And so it's wonderful to see that you're kind of taking a cutting edge approach to doing this. I'm going to ask you a prioritization question here, and you may not want to answer it, but I'm curious. So you measure coachability, resilience, decision making, systems thinking,
Hmm.
relational intelligence, and a bunch of other things as well. But those, let's focus on those five, for example. If a founder was watching this going, okay, so there's probably one thing I can focus on improving in the next 12 months or so, what do you reckon is the one that would have the biggest impact on their ability to grow and take that company through to an exit?
I think it's coachability and identity flexibility. I mean, to
Mm,
me, if you're open to hearing feedback and changing, and you have a growth mindset, then there's so much you can do. I mean, no matter where you're starting from. And I also have heard this confirmed from most of the investors I speak with, even if they don't have a formal process of evaluating a founder, they will usually say what I look for primarily is coachability. And so I think that everyone has a sense that that's really important in terms of a person or team's ability to take in outside information and do something strategic with it. It doesn't mean that you're just a doormat and you, okay, whatever you say, I'll just I'll change no matter what you think I should do. It's more
right.
like how strategic am I with the information that's coming in? How do I consider it and thoughtfully examine myself and decide to do something with that information? So that's what we're really measuring. It's not just um this person takes in everyone's feedback and does something with it. It's they're strategic about it. But to have that growth mindset and to be open to change, that is just you can do so much with that. So I would say
Yeah.
that's the primary thing to focus on.
Yeah, yeah, I love that, and I would agree actually. So, as an investor, many over 50 investments in early stage businesses now, that is actually the number one thing that I go looking for. And so, my habit is to challenge people and to ask people open-ended questions anyway. And so, and then I directly ask the question around coachability. Give me an example of that kind of classic situational type question. And it may not surprise you to learn that I've been in a number of conversations where I've had, no, I know better than you. We've tried that before. This avenue's closed. No, you're wrong, kind of thing, which to me demonstrates a lack of openness, but also a lack of coachability. So I try and, do some coaching on the call with them. And then you ask the direct coaching question, and they say, "Oh, I'm incredibly coachable, like spectacularly so, like probably the most
Right.
coachable person in the room." And I'm like, wow, low coachability, low self awareness. This is a hard no from me.
That's why you're already incorporating. But
Right.
so what do you think in the I read online that you've been part of 12 exits and you've made 51 or so investments. What do you think have been the constructs, if you will, to use my language, of success that have been most important for those founders or teams to be successful
Yeah.
in the
So what
exits?
Yeah. So what do I go looking for? So I look for coachability, and I do it through the method that I've just mentioned. Resilience, I go looking for hardship in people's background. And
Mhm.
so the way that I do this, I haven't talked about this before, is you need to build trust in the room. You need to build like a safe space, psychological safety for the person. And so I build up to the point of saying to the person that I'm going to share with you a personal story because I'm going to ask you for one in a second. And depending on what I know of that person, I've got a number of instances of hardship in my background. We all do if you go looking for them. Not all of us do, but most of us do. And so I share that story. And then I look at them and I say, now take as long as you need, but I'd like you to dig deep for me. And this is a safe space. This is a confidential environment. I'd like you to share with me an instance of hardship that you had in your life and what you did about that and then what you made it mean. And I may layer those questions at the outset, but I get them to tell me that story and I demonstrate empathy. I have empathy for them, and then how was it for you? How did that influence your work to get you through to today? And the reason that I do that is that I've seen this particularly with younger founders that have the um, all American would be what you'd describe it as, but the private school captain of the first 15, cheerleading squad is what you'd say, but the equivalent of that thing in New Zealand kind of thing, which is clearly were given many opportunities, and maybe they rose to the challenge of those opportunities along the way, but they weren't beaten down. And if a startup is going to do nothing else for you, it is going to beat you down many times
I
along
can
that.
attest to that.
Right, right. You're gonna get hammered
Yeah.
down, right? And so to me, resilience is just that thing of being able to pick yourself up off out of the dust without needing to have someone drag you up out of the dust. Dust yourself off and go, okay, what did I learn? And I need to go again. So that's the second thing that I go looking for. Then the third is values. And so I want to have them explain to me coherently and cogently what they think that their values are. And what I do is this is the question that I use. Again, it's later in the conversation, and I share with them what my values are. And I say, in an imaginary world where you could live true to only three values, uh, and they were the things that you had to live into day to day, so they governed the way that you existed in this imaginary world, what would those values be? Now I say, take as long as you need. I don't care if you take 3 minutes. And you can I want you to stay in the room and I'm going to go and Google or have a chat to their GPT about that thing. But then I say, I'm going to remove three values from the table: trust, honesty, and integrity. And the reason I say that is because every single person, if they're not guided, will have one at least of those things. And what I've discovered over time, before I had that qualifier, is that people that had all three of those, my main values are trust, integrity, and honesty. They are actually the least trustworthy, least integrity oriented people around because they had to reiterate it. They had to state it so many times, right? And the thing with all of those things is that integrity is very subjective. So you have the Hells Angels in the United States. We have the mongrel mob in New Zealand. We also have the Hells Angels, unfortunately. But for those folk that associate in those environments and world, they have a code of conduct. So you could have integrity as a patched up gang member. Society has viewed you as being without integrity. you're probably not trustworthy and you're probably not
Mm,
honest. You
mhm.
probably spent some time inside. Society has deemed that you are not, one of us, so to speak. Yet in that environment, you have to have integrity. I reckon 2026 is perhaps the most important year of the new millennium. This is powered through artificial intelligence. There's a tectonic shift going on in business right now, and I think you have an opportunity to capitalize on it. I've written a white paper. It's available on my website, joshcomrie.com, under the resources section, completely free of charge. And it'll give you some thinking and some resources and some how-tos in this rapidly changing world. Enjoy.
Well, I think, on that note, something I really enjoy about the patterns we're pulling out is what isn't present in what someone is saying.
Mm,
And so some of the reports that we've delivered recently have been profound because they'll often speak to, this person didn't bring up relational intelligence at all in any of the talks they gave. They didn't reference other people or kind of indicate a high level of empathy. The AI or the human scorer will pull out some of these patterns of what the negative space analysis, we like to call it. What isn't present in what is being said? And so you kind of brought that up. What is the nonverbal? What's the in between? What isn't present?
mm.
And so sometimes you can sense a lot from a person for what they don't bring up or what they don't reference or say.
Yep, yep, I get it, and I understand that. Is there anything that I haven't asked you about either what you're up to in your business, the Readiness Engine, or about this kind of evaluating fit of people within businesses and founders with each other?
Well, I think it's just important to reiterate that it's not that lower levels of development are bad. It just means that you might not if you're not at a higher level of development, it just might mean that a particularly complex job might not be the right fit. And just looking at pedigree or past performance in a role or a warm intro or a reference doesn't mean that somebody's ready for a role. And I think we're
Mm,
making a lot of assumptions about past performance or
yeah,
some of those factors in decision making, and that the decision making process about who's ready to lead is also wrought with a lot of bias. Sometimes it's gender bias, sometimes it has to do with geographic origin, sometimes it has to do with socioeconomic status. Like, we are just coming into a lot of conversations, I think, about hiring and promotions that might be kind of laden with some of our own bias. And so, through kind of transcript analysis and other means, we can help kind of reduce some of that bias and reduce things like the halo effect for the founders. Like, just because Stanford, the Bay Area VCs are saying this, hyping up this founder, let's take a deeper look. Are they really the right founder for this? So anyway, I just think that's a really important bigger picture thread that I'm seeing, that people often balk at the use of AI for evaluating people, but I think that it can draw from larger data sources and patterns, and in some cases maybe augment and do a better job of human decision making. So I think we just have to feel our way through it and experience our way through it. But I just don't want to throw out this great technology and its potential for removing bias in decision making or helping remove bias.
yeah, yeah. I completely agree with that. GPT, more so than Anthropic, just as two examples there, is very much about the statistical likelihood of something happening, which is how they've kind of built the core architecture of the application. And so, in other words, what that means is that it's more likely or less likely, and proportionately across that scale, to happen based upon this bit of information that I have in front of us. And, we, because of our biases, our distinctly human biases, it can be really, really challenging to step away from the thing that we're either drawn to or repulsed by. And also, it's really, really hard cognitively to get our heads around a large amount of information and data at the same time. And those two things are things that the machine is really, really good at: minimizing our biases and maximizing the consumption of data and being able to have that big picture awareness. So, yeah, I get it. So,
Absolutely.
big plans for the business, Logan. What's your intention? Is it the crack it out of the park and have the big exit? Is that where you hope the journey will end?
So I can come back and actually be here for the exit
Exactly.
conversation. That's the plan.
That's the plan. I love it.
So we have two areas that we're focusing, one is consumer-facing products that will exist on, plugins and things like that that will exist on Claude and other platforms. And the idea there being that you can have a leadership spine that's evaluating your leadership capacity with transcript data as you go. And so it'll be more of a real time evaluation. And then we're also going to have enterprise level engagements with pension funds and PE firms and others, and then the middle market companies that we work with. So just exploring and continuing to build there. And, we're raising a round right now. So there's a lot happening, and I'm very excited for the future.
Great. Well, I love the work that you're doing. It really does fill a need that I identify in the marketplace. And so I wish you the best in kind of scaling and growing this. And I look forward to following the journey and having you back on the show when that big exit has happened.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I love that we could have this conversation about what it does take to get to that two comma exit. And, I think this is an underrepresented area of discussion. And I appreciate you bringing it to the forefront.
Thank you so much. And Readiness Engine, no doubt if people Google that, they'll be able to find you and what you're up to very easily. So go and hunt them down, and you can follow Logan, of course, on LinkedIn. So thanks so much again, Logan.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to the show. If you've gotten this far, I reckon you've probably enjoyed it. And there's more available for you in the form of my book, Two Commas. It's available on my website, joshcomrie.com. I've done an Audible version, which is on amazon.com, and there's a Kindle one kicking around on either of those resources as well. I've had some wonderful, unsolicited feedback from early readers. They describe it as being punchy, clear, helpful, and actionable. What it's not is a guide on how to sell your company. You can go to ChatGPT for that. It's more insightful, experiential-based, and a bit of a blend of psychology, philosophy, and what it takes to build something meaningful and what all that means afterwards. Thanks so much for listening, and I hope you grab yourself a copy.